Bali, with its temples and heavenly beaches, the Indonesian island is a dream destination for many. In the first half of 2023 alone, just under 3 million tourists visited Bali, which has a population of some 4.5 million.
The temples is also beautiful. It is astonishing.
It's a beautiful view and food, of course.
But there's a side of Bali that tourists aren't keen to see.
A lot of plastic actually in the sea and around as well.
In the streets also. Seeing something like this is, it's a shame.
Bali has a trash problem. On the beaches and streets, in the rivers, the garbage piles up everywhere. Official waste management or recycling programs are virtually non-existent. This mangrove forest south of the capital Denpasar used to be a tourist attraction, but now it's closed to the public. Local authorities are no longer able to manage the accumulating waste.
Hello.
Hello, Gary.
Siblings Gary and Kelly have taken it upon themselves to clean up Bali's beaches and rivers because the authorities aren't doing it. They're French. Their parents fell in love with the island in the early 2000s and settled here.
We've been living in Bali for over 20 years now. We're more Balinese than French. We grew up here. We've adopted this island, and ever since, we've wanted to protect it.
Are we going?
They founded the organization Sungai Watch, aimed at intercepting garbage in rivers before it's washed out to sea.
This isn't the Bali you see on postcards or Instagram. This is the real Bali.
The NGO has installed floating barriers like this one to catch trash coming from the capital.
This is the last barrier we have between the city and the ocean. So it's kind of the last hope of stopping all this rubbish. And that's why we clean it every day.
The heat is exhausting and the stench overpowering, but Gary and Kelly are undeterred.
These are chicken intestines. This work is no picnic, I must admit. We'll keep this.
They sort through the rubbish and pick out plastics. There's more and more plastic waste in Bali, and recycling is often difficult.
These days we're finding a lot of polystyrene. For example, lots of little polystyrene balls like these. They're almost impossible for us to collect. We find everything from shoes to sauces, ketchups, mayonnaise and snacks. But otherwise it's a lot of packets like this one. This one still has food in it. Disposable drinking water cups are what we're finding the most. That's a French brand, Danone. They come with a straw. That's more or less banned now.
We really can't go on cleaning up these rivers for years and years.
That smells especially bad.
In 2 hours, the Sungai Watch team collects 200 kilos of plastic waste and more than 1,700 tons in the past 3 years. A huge amount of waste that doesn't end up in the sea, but Gary and Kelly are both aware that it's just a drop in the ocean. Indonesia is the world's second largest plastic polluter of the oceans after China. Indonesia is the world's largest island nation, an archipelago of more than 17,000 islands. The country extends over more than 5,000 kilometers. It's one of the most beautiful places on the planet, with volcanoes, paradise beaches, lush rice paddies, and pristine forests. Indonesia is the world's fourth most populous country, with more than 280 million inhabitants, but it's also one of the most polluted.
Look at the sea, it's all black.
Indonesia is rich in natural resources and has ambitious goals. Because the capital Jakarta is gradually sinking, the government has decided to simply move it into the forests of Borneo.
The capital isn't just a symbol of national identity, it's also the vision of a progressive Indonesia.
It was the former Indonesian president's goal to turn his country into one of the world's leading industrial nations. But this industrialization comes at a price: the destruction of nature and the displacement of local communities.
We, the Tagutil, are angry because they have destroyed our forest.
All over the archipelago, people are campaigning for the future of their homeland. Daru lives on the island of Java and is fighting against plastic pollution. The country produces more than 3 million tons of plastic waste every year.
We really want to stop this plastic tsunami.
On the island of Borneo, Basuki is trying to save orangutans from imminent extinction.
I think that no future for orangutan in this tiny forest.
Java is the economic heart of Indonesia. With more than 1,000 inhabitants per square kilometer, the population density here is one of the world's highest. It's also Indonesia's most industrialized island, with factory after factory as far as the eye can see. Like here in the east of the island, in the village of Tropudo. These chimneys emit ominous black fumes all day long, releasing invisible particles, microplastics.
One or two more, please. Thank you.
Daru is a biologist and influential climate activist in Indonesia. When she goes to the market, she doesn't shop like everyone else.
I'd like some tofu.
She's always careful about what she buys.
Tofu here, it's favorite food for Indonesian people. It's good food because it's high protein, so it's healthy food if the process is also clean and safe. Makasih ya, Bu.
Daru also checks where the eggs come from.
Put them in here, please. I'll take 10. Hi, is anyone selling fish too?
Daru's also very cautious when buying fish and seafood.
Put the insides in the plastic bag, please. I want to take it home with me.
It's a shame because our life has been flooded with plastic everywhere, in the water, in the air, in the soil. Even the unborn baby, they already contain microplastic inside the belly of the mother. So we need to check whether in our food is already contaminated with plastic or not. Yeah.
When she returns to her house by the river, Daru doesn't go straight to the kitchen, but to a private laboratory she's set up on the ground floor.
Put the tofu in here for weighing.
She takes 10 grams of tofu to check what it contains.
Wash it with distilled water, not tap water.
Daru and her husband run the NGO Ecoton, set up to fight against plastic pollution. In 2011, they received an award from US President Barack Obama in recognition of their environmental work.
Go, 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 go.
After a few hours, the results of the tofu analysis are ready. Daru wants her husband and 3 daughters to see them.
This particle of microplastic we found in the tofu. It's shocking, and the size here is very small. 1 square is 1 millimeter. So this particle here, the length is 1 millimeter.
In the 10 grams of tofu analyzed, Daru finds 18 plastic fibers like this one. Microplastics can cause a number of health problems.
Also find this particle inside our lung.
But how do bits of plastic end up in tofu? Daru has an explanation.
Assalamualaikum.
Beneath her quiet exterior, Daru is a very influential person.
Show me how you make the tofu.
She's managed to build relationships with certain tofu factory owners. The production site chimneys are poisoning the region's air. Daru wants to convince them to change their manufacturing processes.
Once the raw material has arrived, what do? Do you wash it?
The raw material is the soybean from which milk is extracted. Around 20 people work here. They earn €6 per day. At temperatures of more than 40 degrees, it's difficult to breathe. Daru's primarily interested in the tofu cooking process.
Is it done? Don't add anymore.
As wood has become too expensive, this plant burns plastic waste instead.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. They're cooking tofu. They're using plastic.
Just a few euros worth of plastic is enough to fuel the factory for a whole day.
It should not be here. Actually, it's not allowed to be sending here. But a tofu maker needs fuel, cheap fuel, so it's still.
The air in the factory is full of microplastic particles released when the plastic is burned. These particles then get mixed in with the soybean paste.
Doesn't the smoke make you cough all the time? My throat's totally dry because I'm not used to it.
You're not used to it?
All of the region's tofu manufacturers use plastic as fuel. Daru aims to convince the manager of this factory to burn coconuts instead. This would be less harmful to the environment.
Is there a difference if you use plastic or coconut shells?
With coconuts, the smoke is cleaner.
When was the last time you ran production without plastic?
In the 80s.
In the ashes of one of the ovens, we spot some French ham packaging. It has a red label. But what's French charcuterie packaging doing in a tofu production plant in Indonesia? We find the answer here on an illegal landfill site. There are lots of these in East Java. They're full of plastic from all over the world.
This one from Italia. This one looks like it's from France. Here this looks like from France. In the Lidl supermarket. This one is big. See? It's from Belgium.
Europe, South Korea, Australia, Canada. plastics from all over the world are transported thousands of kilometers and end up here.
Why do these countries send the plastic waste in Indonesia? Why don't they keep it?
Plastic is very difficult to be recycled, to be treated. It's too expensive.
That these countries save much money sending the trash in Indonesia?
It's like a new colonialism because they don't want to manage their own waste in their home country, and it's easier to just ship this trash to developing country.
Major industrialized nations used to sell their non-recyclable waste to China. But in 2018, China put a stop to the import of plastic waste. Exporters then turned to neighboring countries, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. In 2019, the authorities in Jakarta objected. Indonesia would no longer be the world's rubbish dump. Hundreds of containers full of waste were sent back to their countries of origin, a move that made global headlines. Today, the import of plastic waste into Indonesia is banned. But Daru shows us how exporters have managed to circumvent this ban. She takes us along the port of Surabaya.
Customs in the Surabaya Tanjung Perak port, but you know, there are millions of containers come every year, so our government don't have enough capacity to check every single container, so they only can check a sample.
Daru says plastic waste is concealed in containers that deliver recycled paper to cardboard factories.
Can also become a vehicle that will bring plastic scrap inside the paper mills. The paper mills import about 3 million tons of paper waste.
Daru estimates that 10% of the container's contents is illegal garbage. She believes that 300,000 tons of recycled plastic are smuggled into the country each year through the cardboard factories. There are more than 50 such plants in the region.
Good morning. I have an appointment with the manager.
After days of negotiation, Daru has succeeded in convincing one factory manager to let us in. She doesn't want to be filmed, but the camera's still rolling. The manager agrees to show us the product.
Which is outside of the factory. This is clean, right? We still can use as a raw material. Would you allow us to film the factory? If the factory we cannot do, because the factory actually is very confidential.
All we're allowed to film is what she calls the raw material. Hundreds of bales of waste paper from all over the world stored out in the open. The deputy manager shows us around.
This is the waste paper, the raw material for making paper. So we recycle all the waste paper and produce it back to paper.
Okay. So inside?
Inside is all paper.
Okay, look. Here there is plastic. It's not so clean.
Very little.
There is plastic bag. There. What is it? This is paper, plastic. Yeah. This is plastic.
Was the plastic deliberately hidden among the waste paper by exporters, or is it due to errors at the sorting stage? The deputy manager says it depends on the country of origin.
you build paper and you find plastic. It's not fair.
Yeah, it's neither work for us to solve. It's neither work for us to solve. If they put plastic in here.
You have to do the job.
Yeah, we have to do the job.
And it's difficult.
Yeah.
The deputy manager assures us that the factory incinerates all the plastics after sorting them. Before we leave, he tells us that other factories have less scrupulous practices. It's their plastics that end up in landfills or tofu production plants. Plastic pollution isn't Indonesia's only environmental problem. 800 kilometers away, the capital of the archipelago, Jakarta, is battling decline, in the truest sense of the word. With a population of more than 30 million, the metropolis is one of the largest cities in the world. But life in the capital has become barely tolerable. There's too much noise, traffic, and pollution. However, Jakarta's main problem is that it's gradually sinking. Large parts of the city are already below sea level. Lens owns a restaurant here.
It's just... Okay, so this is our barrier system. Last time the water came in about this deep. This rubber needs to be replaced. But
protecting his business from flooding is a challenge. In the rainy season, the water level can rise incredibly fast, like in the year 2020.
We were having a big party, live music, maybe 400 people inside. We had done the countdown, but it started raining harder and harder. The music was on and people were still partying, and I was worried it would get worse, and it did get worse. The street flooded and flooded and flooded, so we had to tell people to start leaving. So the water was coming in as people were leaving. We were completely flooded.
The entire city was affected. In another Jakarta restaurant, the floods brought an uninvited guest.
How long is it?
This huge python.
Put it in the sack.
The 2020 floods cost the lives of almost 70 people. Water levels in Jakarta are rising fast. The city is gradually sinking. Some districts as much as 25 centimeters a year. A contributing factor, many people living here don't have access to municipal water, so they dig their own wells to extract groundwater. We're at the home of Victor Konen. The Dutch national specializes in flood protection and works for the city of Jakarta.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons Jakarta is sinking. Basically, the only way we can get our water is by pumping it from the ground. This is the pipeline that goes into the ground. We have a 60-meter deep well, and we pump it up, and then it goes through all kinds of filters, and then all the way up into the storage tank, and then it's fed into the house.
Victor's 2,000-liter tank provides him with drinking water, but also enables him to fill his swimming pool, like most of his neighbors. Factories, hotels, shopping malls, they're all extracting water from Jakarta's swampy soil. The ground is sinking. Countless high-rise buildings exacerbate the problem. Victor's been trying to find a solution to the problem for 10 years now. The Jakarta authorities consulted him in their ongoing project to build a giant seawall. The dike is scheduled for completion in 2027.
what we see here are the various levels of elevating the seawall. So this one was in the 1980s, the 90s, somewhere in 2010, 11, 2015. So because the city is sinking, every time they need to raise the seawall to keep the city dry.
Victor comes regularly to check on the state of the dike. He's concerned because it's leaking in places.
But the pressure is so high, it's pushing seawater through the dike. And they do repair it every once in a while, so they close it off. And then in another area, water emerges.
A few hundred meters away is a district known as the Aquarium. So called because people here live 4 meters below sea level. They've also noticed leaks at the base of their wall.
I've lived here since I was small. I'm a local.
As long as there's no tsunami.
Let's pray that never happens.
Nearby, another dike is still under construction.
Well, one of the problems of water fighting against floods, it never ends. So basically, if you want to end it, you have to leave the city. And it's actually, it is a strategy, and it's called managed retreat.
Former Indonesian President Joko Widodo backed this very strategy in 2019. He took a surprising radical decision to relocate the administrative capital to the island of Borneo, 1,300 kilometers away. Right in the middle of one of the world's most beautiful rainforests. The name of the new capital, Nusantara, which is Indonesian for archipelago.
The capital isn't just a symbol of national identity, but also a representation of the nation's progress. This serves the vision of a more progressive Indonesia.
This 3D animation shows the full extent of this mega project. The vision is a futuristic high-tech city where residents get around using electric cars, on foot, or by bicycle. It'll be home to 2 million people, most of them civil servants of Nusantara. The country's ministries will be headquartered here, as well as the presidential palace, an initial prestige project that's now complete. This footage shows the construction site. It's off limits and impossible to get any closer. The center of the new jungle capital will extend over more than 500 square kilometers. Planned budget to date, 32 billion euros. Local activists denounced the project as an ecological aberration. For the construction of its metropolis, which it claims will be emissions-free, the government has logged thousands of hectares of forest and built gigantic reservoirs, such as this one, to supply the capital with water. Mr. Pandi and his wife, who live in the neighboring village of Sepaku, are furious. To build the reservoir, the government diverted the river that runs behind their home. All that's left is a marsh of stagnant water. Mrs. Pandi is worried about using it.
This water comes from the river. Now the color of our river water looks like this. We used to be able to drink it, but now it needs to be boiled before it can be used for drinking or cooking.
Mr. and Mrs. Pandi are members of an indigenous tribe on Borneo, the Pasir Balik. They've lived here for generations, but have no documents to prove it. To enlarge the reservoir, the government has decided to evict them and forcibly resettle them with other families.
This house is my house. This land is my inheritance. I've never bought a piece of land. It sounds so strange that we who own the village who own the land must still buy the land. If we own the village, that also generally means we own the land.
Today, Mr. and Mrs. Pandey have put on their best clothes. They're attending a meeting that's crucial for the future of the village and their home. A parliamentarian from the capital has agreed to meet them and other residents of Sepaku in the municipal hall of the neighboring town. It's the first time that a public official has come to hear what they have to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, I greet the head of the indigenous community and residents of Sepaku.
Mrs. Pandey is one of the first to speak. She calls on the MP to give them a written guarantee that residents won't be evicted.
Did anyone say that your land would be cleared?
Not yet.
So why should I write you a letter?
To give us clarity.
Let's move on. I'd like to build you a road, but after the bridge to the top.
Mr. Pandey doesn't trust politicians. After the MP leaves, he speaks his mind.
To me, it feels like children being given sweets to calm them down.
While the government builds the new futuristic city of Nusantara, Mr. and Mrs. Pandey don't know what'll be left of their village or forest, and whether they'll still have a roof over their heads. Indonesia is home to the world's third largest rainforest, after those in the Amazon and Congo. Millions of hectares of thousand-year-old trees. But palm oil producers are burning them down to plant palm trees. Swaths of virgin forest have already been destroyed for the plantations. On Borneo, one man has made it his mission to save the trees. To meet him, we had to travel over a great distance by plane, boat, and motorbike. When we arrive, Basuki Budi Santoso is very busy. He works for a foundation that replants trees where they've been cut down.
How many trees did you plant in your life?
I forget, but there's so much. 1 million, maybe more. I have many children in many places.
On Borneo, Basuki and his colleague Adut aren't just looking after the trees, but also the creatures that live in them, the orangutans. The destruction of their habitat means they're now a threatened species. Populations have declined by 80% since the 1970s. They're protected in nature reserves, but not here.
People said that we still have so much orangutan, but orangutan really unprotected, and many of them already dead. So especially in this area, nobody cares with orangutan here.
Basuki is trying to protect the orangutans, but he's up against a very powerful opponent, the palm oil companies. Indonesia is the world leader in palm oil production. Greenpeace says that Indonesia produced more than 46 million tons of palm oil in the 2022-2023 harvest period. The palm oil is used in the food industry, but also for biofuels.
So that's the palm oil canal, about 1 kilometer from here.
On Borneo, palm tree fields have replaced the forest. Millions of hectares as far as the eye can see. On the right bank of the Sekonya River, a 400-meter strip of forest is all that's left.
Of course, because not enough habitat for orangutans, not enough food. Okay, guys, we are ready.
Hunger is driving the orangutans closer to the palm oil plantations. So close, they're putting themselves in danger.
This is palm oil fruit. This make oil. Orangutan come to this area for survive, for get the food. And they also eat the young leaf of the plantation. Company think that orangutan is the enemy.
A few years ago, plantation workers contacted Basuki to warn him that a massacre was underway.
We got information that almost 200 orangutan killed around here. 3 months I try collect information, I talking with many local people and we check. And yes, conflict that the orangutan.
Basuki informed local journalists who recorded this footage.
How long has this skull been buried?
It must be 1 or 2 years.
The death of these orangutans was never officially investigated.
But 100% I believe that this company activities, not the local people. They just get the benefit, they take the land, they destroy the forest, they kill the orangutan. I'm so angry. That first time my feeling. I'm really angry.
There are only a few dozen orangutans left along the river. It's very rare to see them in the wild.
There is the proboscis monkey sound. You know, proboscis monkey with the long nose.
This monkey is very unique. It's a species that can only be found here.
Basuki and Adut have already spotted several proboscis monkeys, but as yet, no orangutans. Suddenly, Basuki sees a movement in the trees.
The orangutan about 10 years old, yeah, and female. And local people call this orangutan buku. It's the size of orangutan small. The orangutan is the pandanus leaf, the young leaf of pandanus. Mean that not enough food, because usually orangutan not eat the pandanus. So orangutan move to the river for eat the young leaf of pandanus. It's also too danger for orangutan to river, because this river also habitat for crocodile. In many cases, orangutan also attacked by crocodile.
The orangutan wilds, when they see the humans around them, they will be gone.
Basuki imitates the sound of an orangutan.
It's like call, yeah. That's the warning if the orangutan usually make the sound like that.
She's angry, right?
Yes, she's angry.
Where's she now?
The encounter lasted just a few minutes. The female orangutan didn't reappear. Basuki and Adut know of a place in Borneo where orangutans are not frightened by the approach of humans. Tanjung Puting is one of the largest national parks on the island. It's one of the few places where orangutans are protected. Every day at 3 p.m., they meet tourists from all over the world. On this wooden platform, rangers have placed 40 kilos of fruit, mangoes, sweet potatoes, and a local fruit, durian.
so the fruit is always in mouths, always in hands.
They're like people. It looks like they're talking to each other. They're funny. Sometimes they bite each other, but it's probably just messing around.
The DNA of these great apes is 97% similar to that of humans. Their brains resemble those of a 3-year-old child. Basuki didn't come with us to the national park. For him, it's a zoo. He believes that if they are to survive, the orangutans must learn to live without any human intervention. Like Basuki, many Indonesians are fighting for the preservation of their land and its people. We meet another campaigner on a remote island in the far east of Indonesia. Halmahera belongs to the Moluccas archipelago, formerly known as the Spice Islands. For the people here, life has become complicated. Every day for the past 45 years, Mr. Tobel has risen at the crack of dawn to catch fish for his family. But now, no matter how hard he pulls on his line, he's barely catching anything.
I used to come home earlier. Now there aren't many fish left. It's hard to catch them.
Can't you fish further out to sea?
No, we can't.
Today he's accompanied by a young man from the village. Adlun, a local climate activist, is concerned at levels of marine pollution.
The sea is polluted and blackened by the coal industry. The water near the shore is very dark. What's worse, the water is very warm. Even the deep currents are warm.
They generate energy with coal-fired power stations and use seawater to cool their condensers. The hot water is channeled back into the sea.
Sometimes you find dead fish in this area.
Responsible for the pollution is a French-Chinese company called Weda Bay. This huge 46,000-hectare industrial park produces Indonesia's new white gold, nickel.
The industrial zone is just behind us. There's a foundry there and a coal-fired power station. That's the export harbour, where the nickel is loaded onto big ships. The nickel is in those piles on the ground, the piles of white stuff.
Nickel is known as the devil's metal. It's used to make batteries for electric cars. It's the fuel of the future, and Indonesia now produces nearly half of the world's refined nickel. Mr. Tobel knows it's forbidden to get any closer.
Quick, let's get out of here.
He's spotted a police speedboat and prefers to keep his distance. The Indonesian government is throwing its weight behind the nickel industry. On many islands in the east of the country, like Halmahera, it has granted numerous mining permits. A 9-hour drive away, with their magnificent virgin forests, are the Watu-Watu Mountains. But at the heart of the lush jungle, the surface of the earth has been scarred. Another nickel mine belonging to the French-Chinese company Weda Bay. It has cut down thousands of hectares of forest in recent years. For centuries, the Watu Mountains have been the domain of one of the most isolated indigenous tribes in the world, the Togutil. Today, the expansion of the nickel mines is threatening their survival. Rent, Regal, and Bibi are members of the Togutil tribe. They've since settled in one place, but today they're visiting cousins who still live as nomads. They want to help them by bringing them some food.
We'll bring rice for our family, the Togutil Habeba, and eggs too. We're trying to bring them as much as we can. We're giving it to them to support them.
Bibi, the only woman in the group, is 45 years old. She's making the trip for the first time.
I'm visiting my family who I've not met yet. Those who never leave the forest.
Bibi's husband, Regal, was born here.
As a child, I spent a lot of time playing with the Togutil Habeba in the forest. I know a lot about them, because my mother told me a great deal about the family, the Togutil.
This road cutting through the jungle was built by the company that runs the nickel mine. It's for employees only. If you don't work here, you can't use it, neither by car nor motorbike. To reach their family, Regal and his friends have to make the long journey on foot. More than 30 kilometers in the tropical heat.
This is hard going. Let's have a rest.
Night has fallen, and Bibi and the others decide to take a break. With a few dry branches, they make a fire to cook on, out in the middle of nowhere. The Indonesian rainforest is often full of surprises. At 9 p.m., miners on the late shift are making their way home. After just a few hundred meters, the car has to stop to allow a royal python to cross the road. The driver agrees to take Bibi and her friends to the mine.
We'll get out here.
Bibi, Regal, and Rents plan to spend the night here, in a little hut just a few meters from the road and the mine trucks. At the first light of dawn, the companions set off again, but Regal has a bad feeling. The last time he came to see his family 3 weeks ago, the nomadic group was living close to a river. But now there's no one there, and the stream has been cut off.
Look, the mine has destroyed all the water sources. My family can no longer use the water. We can't find them anymore. We don't know where they're living now. All this was the territory of the ethnic group of the Togutil Habeba.
Regal decides to return to bring the sad news to his family. Other members of the group have settled at the foot of Watu Mountain. They've been living here for 3 months, close to a river. Around 20 members of the Togutil tribe, 5 families of all generations. The Togutil live as they did centuries ago, without electricity and running water, and of course no telephone or internet. They've set up camp in an area surrounded by fruit trees.
They're living here and then they'll move on.
We Takotil are the guardians of the forest, and I'm very proud of that.
20-year-old Garaham is one of the tribe's chiefs. He and his family were also driven out of the mountains by the nickel industry.
I was very angry with the people from the company. If I hadn't been afraid that the police would put me in prison, I would have killed them with my bow and arrow.
Today, the Togotil are in danger because the mining companies are going to expand their activities throughout the entire forest. Whenever we walk past, they're very angry. We can't even pass through.
Since we were there filming, Regal has been searching for his Togotil family. So far, in vain.
Susah lama do dagang.